Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality, disease-free years as possible. Thanks for joining me this week. And Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible. And I use that Bible verse each week as we really look at the science, the literal, factual science of the way we are designed, in the way we use our bodies, that's our physical, the way we use our brains, that's our psychological, mental, emotional state, and finally, the way we eat, our nutritional biochemistry. Today, we're going to take apart fat. We're going to talk about chewing the fat a little bit here and really what man has done with fat. And many shows ago, I think my first show, I taught you that the body requires 5 things. So our designer said, you guys only have to consume 5 things to sustain life: protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. If you look at those 5 things, and we took all 5 of them apart a long time ago, we're going to really be looking at fat, the essential nature of fat. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about fat out there in terms of it being an essential ingredient to sustaining life. And Dr. David Seaman, Seaman, wrote an article back in 2005, which I published when I was writing for the newspapers. And I want to talk to you about chewing the fat, give Dr. Seaman credit. He's a fantastic author, because most people are just very confused about fats, the types of forms that they come in, and the confusion has escalated to basically fear about eating fat. So many people believe that fat's going to kill them, and they're not wrong. It's just that what they're wrong about is the type of fat will kill them. So this is complicated biochemistry. Fats are something that when we talk about them, we should really look for what's called a fat coach. And that coach are people who are basically lipid chemists. A PhD by the name of Mary Ing, E-N-I-G, is just the world-renowned biochemist in the field of lipid chemistry. And we're going to use her in a book called Know Your Fats. And if you're interested in this subject matter, look up the book Know Your Fats by Mary Ing. And this way we could really have a sensible, logical, factual conversation about fats, and you guys could know what type of fats you should be consuming, the way God designed us to be consuming fats, because again, fats are essential for human existence. So the category of lipids contain both fats and oils. So maybe you've heard about lipids, right? You go for your blood test and doctor runs a lipid panel. Well, lipids contain fats and oils. Fats are solid at room temperature and oils are liquid. So butter, for instance, is a fat. Olive oil is an oil, right? So that's the difference between a fat and an oil. Now, all lipids, all of them, whether it be a fat or an oil, are made up of a collection of molecules called triglycerides. So once again, when you go get your blood test, right, you see triglycerides written on your blood test, and a triglyceride is basically, tri means 3. So it's 3 carbons. They're called, this take 3 carbons and what's called 3 fatty acids, and they come together and make a triglyceride. Now we can measure this in the blood, like I said, along with cholesterol. But when you think about triglycerides and cholesterol, right away your blood pressure might have just shot up. Oh my goodness, he said cholesterol. Unlike triglycerides, remember, cholesterol is not a lipid. Okay, so cholesterol is not a fat, and it's not an oil. Cholesterol is not a lipid. It's a special alcohol molecule called a sterol, okay? And it's very different than triglycerides. So we're not going to be talking much about cholesterol today. We want to stay focused on triglycerides, because high triglycerides in your bloodstream will kill you a lot faster than high cholesterol will, okay? High triglycerides, once again, which is free floating fat, oil, right? Those are lipids in your bloodstream. We have to be very careful about high triglycerides and what that means. So let's keep going. So now we have these triglycerides, and here we are concerning these fatty acids. are called saturated, monounsaturated, or polyunsaturated. So maybe you've heard about a saturated fat or a monounsaturated fat, right? And there's a number of differences between these things, but the primary thing in biochemistry, when you talk about saturated, monounsaturated, or polyunsaturated, it basically means the number of bonds between the carbon molecules, which makes them into this classification. So I'm not going to bore you with the biochemistry of how the bonds are all set up. Once again, this is kind of, complicated biochemistry, lipid science. Let's see what Dr. Ring, let her explain it to us since she's the specialist. The biggest problem in our society, guys, is that the fats that lead to diseases are primarily the omega-6 fatty acids. And you've heard me speak about this now over the last couple of years. And these are the inflammatory fats, and they're consumed in both the unrefined state and the partially hydrogenated state, right? So here we are, healthy human populations, and I'm going to come back to those omega-6s. Healthy human populations consume varying amounts of fats. Healthy desert nomads, for instance, consume 10% of their calories from fat, while Greenland Eskimos consume 50% or more of their calories from fat. So it's ridiculous to arbitrarily state that Americans are to eat, no more than 30% of their calories from fat. You've probably heard that, and at the same time, it's detrimental. You and I should not be picking arbitrary numbers. This percent should be in fat, this percent should be in protein. We're all very different people. It comes down to the quality of the fats that we're consuming, okay? Not just the quantity. So if, for instance, in the 1930s, Americans consumed an average of about 124 grams of fat per day, all right? Now, 48% of those was saturated. In 1985, we averaged about 164 grams of fat per day. 38% was saturated. So our saturated fats have actually decreased in the last 60, 70, 80 years. But what happened to our health, our disease state? It's escalated because laboratory man-made derived fatty acids, known as partially hydrogenated fatty acids, which are found in nearly every packaged food in a supermarket, every deep fried food from fast food restaurants and regular restaurants, has just saturated our food supply. So as much as the saturated fat load has come down, we have replaced it with frankenfat. The body doesn't even recognize what this stuff is, and those are called trans fats. So for some reason, saturated fat is still the blame for driving all of this heart disease and cancer, even though our nation's consumption of saturated fats has dropped significantly in the last 75 years. So naturally saturated fat is not to blame. Synthetic man-made fat is to blame. And that is the key difference. We have to be aware, once again, of what we're eating. What are we consuming? When we look at a label, which we're going to get into in a minute. Okay, so naturally saturated fatty acids are very important for human health, okay? Our bodies synthesize these naturally. I'm going to keep going back to natural. Natural means God made. That means God made us saturated fats for a reason. Like those Eskimos I talked to you about. They're not up there, in Greenland consuming trans fats. They're eating a fish and heavily saturated meat. Okay, the reason, and that's naturally saturated fat. That's not synthetically made. So naturally saturated fatty acids do not cause disease. Actually, they prevent disease. And the fact that leads to heart disease are the omega-6 fatty acids. Now we're coming back to the omega-6 fatty acids, which we consume in both unrefined and partially hydrogenated state. And the partially hydrogenated variety of fatty acids, or these are called trans fats, they were developed by the food industry. They were developed by a bunch of guys in a laboratory under a microscope, altering God's fats into something that gives us long shelf life, okay? Because these partially hydrogenated fatty acids, what they do is they prevent food from going bad. So they extend the shelf life. Okay, so this way, when you go to the supermarket, things aren't going bad, so they could sell more of it. And trans fats are lethal to human biological systems. Their consumption is associated with a numerous number of metabolic problems, such as the elevation of LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, and the lowering of HDL. It actually increases our cholesterol by 20 to 30%. That's how bad this stuff is. It disrupts cell membrane fluidity. It also increases our insulin level. We have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes out there. A lot of it is being driven by these bad fats. It also reduces our levels of testosterone. So trans fats are a nightmare and should be avoided. Any food that contains partially hydrogenated corn oil should be thrown away. Throw it in your garbage. Go do inventories of your house. Get rid of any partially hydrogenated oil that's in your house. Our nation's cholesterol problem is likely to be largely driven due to the excessive amount of trans fats that we made in the laboratory and we pumped into all of our food. And we consume far too much omega-6 fatty acids. Those are the ones that make us inflamed, and they are a primary cause of disease in the human body. And it's because we use so much soy. 70% of the oil used in the United States is soybean oil, and this is highly inflammatory omega-6 oil. We have a lot of soy in this country. We have a lot of corn in this country, and man has learned how to industrialize the corn and soy into oils. And the average American, okay, in our bodies, we have an omega-6 to an omega-3 ratio. Now, the omega-3 fatty acids, like fish oil, they're anti-inflammatory. Americans range the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is 20 to 30 to 1. That means inside the blood of an average American is 20 to 30 times more omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3 fatty acids. And we wonder why there is so much chronic illness, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. We have to address the fat. We have to address the inflammation. So we really need to drop the consumption of packaged foods, as well as grain and grain flour like white flour. And we need to look at the overconsumption of this bad trans fatty acids. Okay, our food should really focus on what God designed for us, which are fruits and vegetables, grass-fed beef, lamb and chicken, wild game, omega-3 eggs, and fresh fish. Food should be cooked in coconut oil. Now, coconut oil is a great oil, very stable, and it could also be added to smoothies. Olive oil for making salad dressings. Let's get back to making our salad dressings, not buying them in a bottle. Trans fats are in that bottle. Green tea should be used. Okay, green. It's a wonderful beverage, and we should drink an abundance of water. Also, a multivitamin, multimineral, a good brand. Make sure you know what supplements you're taking. I highly recommend magnesium. 500 milligrams a day, especially before you go to bed, is a wonderful thing to do. Calcium, a good fish oil. A fish oil is going to be an omega-3 fatty acid. Once again, I use laboratories in clinical practice. I know what the quality of the product is. Please be careful where you're buying your products from. And you've heard me speak about coenzyme Q10 in the past. I absolutely love CoQ10. So as we wrap up today, let's go do an inventory of what we're eating. When you go out to dinner, for instance, do you really think that the restaurant has taken the time to buy healthy oils in the making of their food? Healthy, good, rich naturally occurring oils are more expensive. Now, when you look at your cupboard and you look at the oils in your cabinets, let's really focus on the God-given design of healthy fats. Olive oil, flaxseed oil, coconut oil. These are wonderful oils to have in our house. Fats and oils. Fats are solid, oils are liquid. If we're looking at a fat, when you look at butter versus margarine, margarine is garbage. Margarine is a trans fat. Horrible for you. It should be taken out of the food supply. It shouldn't even be allowed to be made in our country. So if we go to organic butter, for instance, and I'm using the word organic for a reason, grass-fed organic butter, that means that the cow ate grass, which is a natural anti-inflammatory product, as opposed to corn, which is a highly inflammatory product, okay? And if we're going to consume a solid, which means a fat, then butter is a much better alternative than margarine. Well, I hope you understood a lot from today's show. Remember, Mary Ing, E-N-I-G, PhD, wrote the book Know Your Fats. Today's information came from Dr. Seaman, who publishes a lot on inflammation and is someone I highly, highly follow and recommend. Thank you for listening to me, Dr. James Proodian, and the By Design radio program, and joining me this week for this episode. If you'd like more information about me, please go to ProodianHealthcare.com. I blog every Wednesday. If you like my information, you could become a blog subscriber at www.drproodian.com. It's spelled Proodian. Have a blessed week and be well.